Hey, B2B marketers, you could learn a few things from business to consumer brands. Number one, familiarity and consistency wins all day long. Brands are not scary, and the more they're familiar with you, the more they're going to say yes to your sales team. Number two, emotion always wins the game. We make decisions from the emotional place in our brain. Stop skipping the real reason why people are or are not buying your product. And number three, visual communication is so much more effective than sales enablement and want words. So B2B marketers, take a cue from your B2C peers. You'll thank me. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Marketing Blender Show. I'm Dacia Coffey, and today's topic is what is the difference between B2B marketing and B2C marketing? So business to business versus business to consumer. Is there a difference? Yes. And why am I talking about this? Well, first of all, I think that there are things that both sides can learn from one another, but especially business to business from business to consumer. The other one is if you're considering hiring a marketer for your team, I want you to know a little bit about the background and the thinking so that when you're interviewing, you can match skill sets and experience to what your actual knowledge is. And same thing, if you're a marketer, I want to be able to do this so that you've kind of got a fast but thorough landscape that you can tap into and think, is there anything I'm missing? Is there any place I can get inspired? Am I being thorough in my tactical execution or in my strategy? And are there places on either side of the fence that I can really use to up-level the results for my organization? So that's why we're doing this. So let's go ahead and just dive in. Now, first things first, if any of you guys have ever taken a class in marketing in college on marketing, you're going to hear about the 5 Ps, right? Product, pricing, promotion, place, people. And traditionally, that has a lot more to do with business to consumer. Now, do all of those matter for B2B? Of course, but not in the same balance. And also, there's a lot more research that goes into each one of those, and those decisions really are make or break for most consumer brands. One other thing I want to say before I really dive in, because we are going to touch a little bit on that, is that it's very difficult for a simple podcast to mush all of business to consumer together, right? So for some of us, we automatically might think CPG, consumer packaged goods, and grocery stores and the things on the shelves, right, in big box places. For others, we might think retail. For others, we might think expensive products, right? So think a purchase of a car, or even purchase of insurance, or anything for your family, a purchase of a new home, right? So to overly simplify, yes, those are business to consumer, but for you, if you're a business owner or a marketing manager of a company where you're business to consumer, however, there is what I refer to as high cognitive load, right? Where the price is bigger, the sales process is a little bit longer, it's a little bit more difficult, or there's more education needed because it's not just a one and done quick impromptu purchase. Well, then you're going to sit right in the middle of this. And I think you're going to pick up on this, but especially for those of you in that environment, I think you're going to be able to get a lot of inspiration. So just kind of wanted to give some nuance there, but let's go ahead and dive in. So first things first, everything in business to business marketing and business to consumer marketing is about know your customer. Know your customer. Now, on the B2C side, they have a tendency to simply be better at this. I think the reason is because as you're looking at volumes of customers, right? You're not always able to track one single person through the entire research and then buyer's journey. And especially if they're high loyalty or high volume repeat purchases, you definitely can't do that. So knowing your customer is critical to be able to deploy influence across volumes of groups and people and do that in a predictable and repetitive way. Now, on the business to business, I really argue that know your customer is no less important. I think you're actually going to get more squeeze out of the lemon for B2B companies to double down on this. I think it's wildly misunderstood. So here's a real nuance business to business organizations. So when we talk about buyer personas or customer avatars or ideal customer persona, The business to consumer companies have a tendency, especially large ones, to know them as human beings. They even know how many cats or dogs and kids and hobbies these people have, right? But on business to business, you know what we have a tendency to do? We name humans markets. Y'all, markets don't make purchasing decisions. Humans do. And you need to know the human, the heartbeat behind their decision-making criteria. And business to consumer really knows this and deploys this well. They have a much deeper depth of research. However, B2B, you can harvest tribal knowledge from your team, from your sales people, from your customer support people, from your customer service people. And you can, depending on the volume or the length of time you've been in business, volume of your data, you can find insights there. So oftentimes B2C, knowing the customer, does come from deep research or data-driven insights about the customer. And business to business oftentimes can come from tribal knowledge and firsthand experience. So a little bit difference there, but equally critical on both sides. One other thing that I want to mention about knowing your customer is on the business to consumer side, you've got people that got a problem. You've got people that just want something. You've got, impetuous purchases, and you've got people that, have a desire or a goal they're trying to achieve. On the business, and so there you can match a lot of different messaging to that. On the business to business side, it's almost always about a problem. Now, sometimes a problem can be disguised as a goal or a desire, but generally speaking, on the B2B side, it really is about problem solution orientation, where on the business to business side or business to consumer, there might be more nuance or more areas to test about what really works for your consumers. Next, because of the B2B side, we have to dive into brand. Now, again, knowing your customer, knowing what they like, the brand has a tendency to represent what those consumers appreciate, and it's less about what the founder or the leadership team thinks is cool and more about what is going to help people buy. On the B2B side, we have a tendency to get confused, right? Like oftentimes these are founder-led organizations, or they were founded by an individual, and even if they grow much larger, they have a tendency to hold on to those origin stories or those origin elements of their brand. And they've never thought through, does this help me stand out in a sea of sameness? Does this actually communicate a visual narrative that accelerates my sales cycle? So I think brand is a lot less understood from a psychology perspective and an ability to influence people, whereas business to consumer, they can't afford not to. Also, it's how it's deployed, right? Like the brand deployment on the business to consumer side is so critical because these are strangers. Very often, the people, except in market research or small panel, they really never know their customers except through data and except through buying decisions. But on the B2B side, we almost always know our customers, or at least know a big chunk of them, right, personally. And so that's a really important component. Is over here, brand has to represent everything you are, whereas over on the business to business side, brand is a complement to the human experience and the relationship aspect. Now, again, I feel like if you deploy brand really, really well on the B2B side, wow, you'll be mind blown, because guess what? All of your B2B consumers are also B2C consumers. They're bringing those same buying tendencies to your environment. You're just leaving a whole lot of opportunity on the table by not deploying it in as an effective way as on the consumer side, right? So a few more things. Oftentimes for business to consumers, you're inside of a family of brand, and then consistency and familiarity, absolutely critical. Familiarity. People love what they are familiar with. They start to identify with it and believe in and have things, that associate who they are in this world through their brand purchases. Now, on the B2B side, I still believe that that is true, but it's not quite as explicit. It's more implied or maybe even subconscious on this side, right? So standing out in the sea of sameness is important. Be recognizable. So I still am a big believer in consistent, but it's not quite as closely tied to memory and habit formation as it is on the business to consumer side. I think a couple final nuances on the brand. Packaging and point of sale helps confirm or deny a consumer's preference for that, right? So at the very end, brand is helping take people across the finish line, explaining and selling for them when they cannot be in the room because they are never in the room. However, on the opposite side, on business to business, brand is the wind at your sales team's back, and brand needs to be distributed all the way through your customer experience. So what you sound like on your website or in your social media or in your trade shows or your video or any of those top of the funnel touches, your sales team needs to sound the same, or maybe we need to have reverse engineered it. Your culture really needs to be on display in order to remove friction. So that alignment on brand really is off screen and off of the traditional deployments of brand and can get much more nuanced and so fun and so good for talent attraction and talent retention too when you are that level of authentic and consistent. So exciting. Okay, so we're going to move into another area, positioning, where is much more well understood and research backed on the business to consumer side and pretty misunderstood on the business to business side. So positioning oftentimes for business to consumer brands has a lot to do with innovation, identifying things that don't exist on the shelves, in the market, in the minds of consumers, or things unmet needs. And so really that's oftentimes where innovation comes from. And sometimes even just the evolution of a brand's messaging strategy. And so that can be very, very different, heavily data backed, and very clear about what are you being compared to. Also on the business to consumer side, they have to do this. The volume of competitors is insane. You have to be crystal clear where you sit in the market. And again, this goes back to the 5 Ps because these are really intentional decisions because of the volume of comparisons that all business to consumer brands actually have to face. However, on the B2B side, positioning, we have a tendency, I don't say accurately or correctly, but we have a tendency to think about positioning as differentiation. No. That is not what it is. Positioning is what are you compared to? What gap or role or space do you hold in the minds of the consumers? That is not about product differentiation. So again, wildly misunderstood frequently on the B2B side, oftentimes not data backed or doesn't even require data. You know why? Because there's only a few named direct competitors. And this is very common in B2B where literally you can count them on a single hand. The other thing about positioning in business to business, sometimes positioning is you being compared to every version of a solution. Sometimes that might mean if you're a software company, as an example, or a service company, well, we're being compared to them doing something manually or doing it in-house or giving it to an in-house person. Sometimes it is you being compared to the cost of no decision or just, why do we have to change? Maybe, you have some change management competition in there, and disruption can be more challenging on the B2B side because there is a process for adoption and understanding. So while disruption on the B2B side sounds so sexy, it oftentimes can represent an uphill climb because you've got to be really, really clear on what you're being compared to and positioned against. And that is not always as self-evident as it is on the consumer side. Are you a CEO of a business-to-business company? Maybe you're a sales leader or a salesperson, or maybe you're in business-to-business marketing. Well, if so, I wrote a book for you, and it's called Corporate Caffeine. Business-to-business marketing is different, but there are certain predictable fundamental principles that will help you unleash your organizational potential and fill your pipeline sustainably. So you can find my book on Audible, on Amazon, on barnesandnoble.com, or any of your favorite retailers. Hope you enjoy it, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Pricing is a really big portion of positioning. On the business to consumer side, I know my B2C marketers and leaders are like, duh, it's just rolling their eyes at me right now. However, a lot of times pricing, unfortunately, is disconnected on the B2B side. B2B folks, pricing is an indication of value, right? So your value proposition, your brand, what you stand for, and the value you can drive once your offering is implemented needs to align with your pricing. And people are making subconscious, lightning fast predictions about what kind of value you do or do not drive based on your pricing. And unfortunately, I've seen this frequently, even from larger B2B companies where they're like, I think this is how much we should charge. At some point, we need to get some alignment across all of that. So there's a lot more depth in positioning. And, on the business to consumer side, this is an area that cannot be ignored simply because it is the competitive landscape that you are faced with constantly, even inside of a platform like Amazon. Wow, positioning, super, super critical. All right, so continuing to expand on this, now we're going to move from positioning straight into messaging, of course. So I'm going to overly simplify. I hope actually I get a whole bunch of arguments because I think it would be fun and I would love to test some of these theories in here, but I'm overly simplifying in some of these areas. So for me, if I'm thinking about business to consumer, messaging has to be about consistency, repetition, and memory. And then it needs to evolve into habit formation. Do they know who you are? Do they know why they want you? Do they have a buying trigger that makes them go, oh, I can remember that I want that now, even if they didn't hear your ad or see some sort of promotion at that exact moment? And then we want them to create habits and loyalty and repetition and buying patterns, no matter whether you're a restaurant or whether you're a consumer packaged goods or, a clothing brand or anything like that. We want repeat buying, and we've got to have memory because we don't exactly know when that person is actually going to be in a buying state of mind. Now, on the B2B side with messaging, first of all, messaging has to travel and mature across a buyer's journey. What a person hears in the very beginning is oftentimes very, very different than what they need to hear in order to close a deal, right? So sometimes business to business can be a one-off where then you have cross-sells and upsells, right? Sometimes it is repetition, but especially at that first point of engagement, there is a lot of education happening. And I don't care if your buyer's journey is 1 month or 3 years, there's still a process and a journey typically that your message needs to go on. And that's very different from traditional business to consumer type of things. The other thing is that a couple different things. So in regards to messaging on the B2B side, oftentimes messaging intentionally deployed around identity, that this product is a mirror for who you are, what you love, what you enjoy, what you deserve, is a really effective and very conscious and direct line of messaging. On the business to business side, it still really, really works, but oftentimes it needs to be assumptive, where that direct line of thinking can feel very distant from the tactical and practical decision on the B2B side. So identity is still really important, and I really argue that you need to know what identity deployments people are bringing to their buying decisions. However, a lot of times it doesn't need to be as direct or as explicit in your messaging. A couple other things too. Both are emotional. B2C has a tendency to be blatantly emotional because it works and because we enjoy that, because we pay attention to it. B2B oftentimes leaves this on the sideline. They shouldn't. Emotion, you guys, is frustration and nervousness and fear and hope and excitement, right? And those are common day-to-day occurrences in the B2B world that oftentimes we're not messaging, and we really ought to. So emotion is a major driver. Additionally, there is higher cognitive load on most business to business decisions, right? Bigger risk, bigger dollars, bigger complexity. And there's a point where a lot of buyers just get overwhelmed in the messaging. I'm not at risk for being overwhelmed by a Cheez-It commercial, right? I am at risk for being overwhelmed by IT services or, all the different versions of SaaS that I'm looking for to solve, my inventory problem, or all of the different consultants that I'm considering around culture management, right? Wildly different levels of cognitive load and emotion. And again, I would argue there's more emotion on the business to business side because of the risk, but we're not oftentimes speaking to that. And so I think that's really, really important. Okay. So moving on, the final couple components that I'm going to move into, I want to talk about the difference in tactics and the options that we have. I think this is going to be a fun place to really learn from one another on both sides. We're going to move into the metrics that matter, right? And then we'll kind of give a quick wrap up on that. So tactics, your marketing plan. Okay, so generally speaking, business to consumer is tofu, top of the funnel. That means I'm over here, visibility. Do you know about me? Look at me, remember me, right? And it's because it has to. Again, oftentimes business to consumer companies are talking to complete strangers that they will never truly know. So again, I recognize if you're a car dealership, you know your customers and that type of thing. However, it's still different than on the B2B side. So on the business and consumer with tactics, we are thinking ads and commercials and memorability and consistency, because you might be messaging to them a month, a day, a minute, or a year off of that purchase, but you want to be positioning yourself in their mind as their top preferred brand, right? And so the tactics are just constant and about memorability in top of the funnel. In social media is super critical because we're on social media as adults on average 2.5 hours a day in America. And so that's a really great point of consistency. Same thing depending on your buyer personas, that we show up on podcasts or on advertisements or on TV or in YouTube or any of the places that we go, sponsorships, sporting events, co-promotions. So again, familiarity, and they're creating halo effects, constantly being like, oh, you like this team? Guess what? And they're sharing that brand alignment in order to get stickier in your head. Subconscious reality is still reality, you guys. Even though it is not conscious to you, it is profoundly powerful in how you make decisions. And B2C companies really understand this, and it's why they are so brilliant at deploying consistency and familiarity, right? And then also their tactics travel from that high volume of touch points with their consumers, but then it's got to get into proof. So lots of social proof, reviews, demos, influencers, like wildly important in this environment. All of us love being on Amazon and seeing like, oh, 21,000 people bought this product last week. Great purchase, right? Like that just makes you go, oh, okay, this must be legit. And then it's got to translate into point of sale or the real environment. So again, packaging is now important, promotions, coupons, deals, nurture components about text messages or anything like that. We're getting closer. Because think about this. Have you ever been like, oh, I've been wanting to try that gum? Right? And you pick up the pack of gum on an aisle, and then you get up to the self-checkout, and at the last second, you're like, you know what? I don't need this. It was gum. It was a $2.50 purchase, and you still bailed. So those top of the funnel brand impressions, those deployments really have to be sticky, especially if it's a first purchase, in order to get over that skepticism and into familiarity and move into loyalty and habit formation. So super, super critical. Now, the tactics on business to business have similar philosophical principles, but good Lord, they are super different in regards to how we deploy them. Let's just start with referrals. Referrals. Didn't even bring that up on the business to consumer side, because even if a friend told you about it, it's so hard to measure, and we have no idea what percentage that is. And so again, it still bleeds into brand recognition, visibility, and familiarity. But referrals on the B2B side are a specific person, I know who they are, specifically said to me, and I specifically made a call or looked at your website, a direct attributed referral. So super, super different. Word of mouth is a lot like that too, right? So just you're the big one, you're the trustworthy one in your environment. And then we do top of the funnel. However, the real impact is in the funnel and at the point of sale. So when you're thinking tactics, we have to start with, where does the revenue and the leads come from? So first of all, revenue comes from people that already know, love you, and trust you, right? So revenue comes from customers, from referrers, from cross-selling and upselling. And so a lot of times the tactics should continue to be deployed around sales enablement. Then we want to increase our win-loss ratios. And then we want to look at lead generation. And is it literally creating a human meeting? Business to business marketing has to be around pipeline development, period. And it is the non-negotiable that is always true. Now, we can get really good at pipeline development, and then we do need to go broader. And this is really where now we can start deploying brand and familiarity, and we can start building resilience and reputation and really lowering that cost of acquisition. But on the tactical side, we are following individual humans or buying committees, pretty unusual. We do have buying committees on business to consumer, but oftentimes it looks like a husband and a wife team, right? Whereas a buying committee on the B2B side might be 8. HubSpot now even says 13 people in a B2B sale, right? So very, very different environment, but it is solidly around pipeline management, not around brand visibility and familiarity deployment or point of sale type of promotions in order to make sure that that purchase sticks immediately. So just a wide range. And then that leads into what are we tracking, right? And so this gets very, very different. I'm actually going to start on the business to business side first. So everything should be reverse engineered from your sales cycle, right? So we should be thinking leading indicators. We should be thinking win-loss ratios, number of clients, how many proposals did we write, number of meetings that we got, and then lead sources. Where did those meetings come from? Did they come from trade shows or digital marketing or referrals or LinkedIn or from our email nurtures or all of the other different tactical deployments? But again, we are tracking one-to-one people through a buyer cycle. Then as your marketing matures, like really tracing a maturity, leveling up, level 1, level 2, level 3 marketing, where now we are going to that top of the funnel and we are now stewarding our brands, stewarding our reputations, and talking about how do we hit our numbers next year and in the following years, lowering our cost of acquisition, increasing the valuation of our businesses. So that's kind of what the metrics look like on the B2B side. On the B2C side, what are we talking about? We are talking about distribution. We're talking about market share. A lot of times on the B2B side, we don't know. There's a lot more data on the B2C side where we can make confident assumptions. We're talking about reach, engagement, reviews, engagement in social, engagement in anything. So we're watching like promotions and coupon codes and people engaging with those, but at volume. Later on, we're tracking traffic. So it might be traffic to an e-commerce site or traffic through the door. So now we're having to make some assumptions about what did top of the funnel do in order to actually drive humans through the door of your business, whatever door they might be walking through. And then of course, I already mentioned we're looking at promotion effectiveness, not having returns, especially if you're in an online business, and we're looking at loyalty, number of customers, repeat, if you can get that data. So pretty different. So the principles are similar. The weighted, effectiveness is very different, but the metrics really, really are very different because it's oftentimes trend analysis on the business to consumer side, whereas it is pipeline analysis on the B2B side. So again, I mentioned, I want you to be thinking through the language that I'm using. If you're hiring a marketer, if you're looking, does this person have transferable skills, right? Because it's a different perspective, especially if somebody has been in B2C versus B2B for a long time and they're looking through. Now, one super important nuance on the business to consumer side. Many business to consumer companies are also business to business companies, right? So I'd mentioned distribution. Now, if your success is critical that you get into Whole Foods, that you get into Target, that you get into Home Depot or any other major distributor, then guess what? You have a B2B pipeline layered on top of that. And this is one of the massive areas of opportunity that B2C focuses so much on demand generation, so much on brand deployment, that they forget that the real success and the real revenue flows through the business to buyers making inventory decisions for their brands and their shareholders. Now, we're talking about all that tactical deployment and all of that sales enablement where you're creating a virtuous cycle of data and demand and then turning into a business to business message. And so oftentimes we see B to B to C, and that's a huge opportunity for business to consumers if they're ignoring those B2B buyers. I mean, just game-changing deployment if you have that opportunity. So, all right. To bring it all together, right? Marketing at the end of the day is about the science and the art of exerting influence on other human beings, right? And so I started at the very top of this by saying, know your customer, and I'm going to wrap it up with know your customer. Every single one, whether it's business to business volumes of people or business to consumer volumes of people or business to business individuals or buying committees. These are individual humans with real context in their environments, with struggling under the war on attention where everything is so loud and so overwhelming, and they simply need you to cut through that, serve them really well in your marketing, and pave a pathway of progress to their purchase, which is them getting what they want, meeting a desire, achieving a goal, or overcoming a problem. Being a partner to people in their purchase decisions is really incredible. And I want to encourage you to return the humanity to this. How people purchase is so important to their welfare, so important to their day-to-day, and so important to who they can be and the lives that they're meant to lead. Your company matters no matter what type of product or service that you have. Don't dishonor that by trying to rush through your marketing and try to blur the buyer's journey when, guys, at the end of it all, the only thing that matters is the transformation that you created in another human heart, even if it's through what you do in business. So thank you guys so much for your time. I hope this served you. And I really, really would love your questions. We get a lot of questions behind the scenes on this, and there's a lot of foundational principles that apply. But man, the nuances can get super tricky, and I'd love to chat with you about it. Thanks so much, you guys. Onward and upward.